And yeah, so for this one, we wanted to go break down mixing for EDM specifically, because I don't know if you guys do EDM, but there definitely falls into a lot of similar mixing techniques you do with any track. But there are a few tricks here and there that are specific to dance music and EDM. And I'm primarily a house producer, so um, I obviously use those techniques. So we wanted to show that, be specific, because there's a lot of house producers, EDM producers here in LA. Yeah, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to walk through a track, a single track, everything I did to mix it. This is a track by another local LA producer. His name's True Colors. He's a friend of mine. He also plays around. He's played at Academy as well. Um, and it's a, I'll open it up in a second. He gave me all the stems. It's a little reduced in the number of stems. Usually I'd have like 80 to 100 in a normal session. This one's probably closer to 20. So things have been condensed, but it's cool. It's actually going to be good because it's going to be a lot more focused. All the same principles, but it's going to be a lot easier to look at. Okay, so I want to also just talk about a couple different things with kind of like theory wise. Like we'll jump into it too, but things I like to mention. I don't know what everybody's skill level is, but I'm gonna walk through a lot of mixing techniques, and I think most anybody can learn all the things you're supposed to do with mixing, right? Like EQ, compression, saturation, setting levels. But it's kind of, I see it like if you learned a piano, you probably could know in theory what a G major scale is and where the notes are. But knowing it doesn't mean you can play it super fast and navigate your way around it. Same with mixing. You know that you get to know the tools in theory, and then it's practice. It's because it's your ear. Like on piano, it's your muscle memory. With mixing, it's just growing your ear, learning what to listen for. Things will start to pop out that you never noticed before. So it's like once you learn it, just practice and practice, practice. I know for myself, maybe you don't get that much time to do it. You do it, finish a song every so often, and then you mix. But there was a point where I just took loops that I was doing just to take simple, like just simplify the production process. I could do quicker, and I would just mix the loops just to get practice with the art of mixing because it takes time. Okay, just want to say a little bit on that. And so let's go into the track. If you want to switch scenes. So this is going to be the session I've got open. I've got if you see up here, these things in black, these aren't what I'm mixing, it's just a few things I have for demonstration. So I want to show you the song that I'll be mixing, and then I'll show you the before and after on it. So. Let's see, let's make sure we got this all set up. I've got to undo this. Let's listen to this is the mixed version.
I know I kept my distance not to hurt us, but I wonder what you do with just one touch. So now I'm stuck on a mission with you in my vision, lost in my own feelings, no way out. I look up to the sun, never knew I'd run away, so never come back home. But I'm never coming home. I'm never coming home. I'm not here. I'm into
All right, so I'm sure you hear the difference. One's a lot louder, punchier, a lot more presence. Um, so I think just to, I think also preference it too. I think there's probably going to be a lot of things that people already know, but there's going to be a handful of things you don't know. So I'll just assume the reason I chose what I'm going to go over is because I think they're really important for the whole mixing process. So I'll just say that. Um, First thing I like to do is just organize everything. I'm sure everybody's got their own way of doing it, but I have one kind of way that I always organize things. Yeah, I go my low end first, drums, effects, instruments, and I actually am trying to also use all the same colors a lot of times too. And for me, not only is it aesthetically pleasing, but things are easy to find. And the most important reason for that is just you want to be able to move fast. So if everything's in a very predictable place and so you don't have to think about finding anything, then you can move much faster because with mixing, it becomes intuitive after a while. You just know the sound like of a particular compressor, so you go to that, put it on, and dial it in. So the quicker you can do that, the less lag time you have of that like inspiration, intuition for what you're doing. And then let's see. One of the first things I do, like, and this again, this is a track for somebody else. So a thing I always do is have a reference track. I'm sure you've heard that recommendation. In this case, there's a friend of mine, True Colors. I asked him for a reference track, so he gave me one, and then, but I also chose a couple of my own because maybe I hear something that I want to also match. But also, too, the reason I personally use multiple reference tracks is because I found that I had this tendency to get obsessive about trying to make my mix match the mix of this reference track. And it was detrimental to my mixes because each song, like I see mixing is the final layer of creativity on a track. And each track has its own sonic quality that makes it unique. And you don't want to try and match it too much to something else because it has its own life and its own voice. So it's this balancing act of trying to match but not make it identical. And having multiple reference tracks is one way for trick my like bad tendencies. So I'll like kind of do an average of all matching all the different ones. And so there's a tool I like that I throw on the master channel called Metric AB, where it allows you to do multiple, like load in multiple reference tracks. So here I've got two main ones and then a couple auxiliary ones. I also, just a side note, I also use this plugin for checking loudness, which we'll go over, but it's got cool features like, it's got some filters, and since it's on the master, it's nice to throw it there, check different frequency ranges really quickly. So this is where I load the references. And then when I'm also, then when I'm getting to start a mix, let me ask though too, like any questions so far? I know we're just getting started, but okay, cool. Um, like where I get started with the mix is I try and identify the most like the character of the song, like the element of it that's the biggest voice in the song. So, oh yeah,
I actually do have a question.
yeah.
I see some people throw like a limiter or something on the master
Hmm.
before they even start writing the track. Is that something that you recommend, or do you just
I think
do
it's
it at the end?
I think it's a preference. I used to do that actually, but I don't anymore because I if you kind of need that squashing of it to give you the feel. I mean, this is kind of a production question, but when you're doing producing, if you kind of need that squashing to give you that sense of like closer to what the final product is, I'd say do it, but be careful. You don't want to produce to that too much. So I would say not. Personally, I'd say do it only a little bit if you want. Um, so let's see. We're saying that. Oh yeah, I was doing what to start with. So this song does have vocals, but the vocals aren't in the drop, which is like the most energetic part of the song. And when you're mixing, you want to pick like at least when you're starting the like the part where the volume is loudest, where the most is going on. So in this one, the part where the most is going on is in the drop, but there's no vocals. And there's this arpeggio slash pluck sound, which is the most dominant. So I've found that this part of this track is the where you've got the most energy. And there's get off the reference track. I thought an arpeggio, but he had a label as a pluck, so I'll just call it the pluck. This is like the biggest like characteristic of the song. So I focus my mixing on that first. So diving into this, I'll just kind of walk you. Let me take off the processing I've got so far, then I'll add it back. Take it off the buses too. And I'm calling these buses, this kind of more classical term, but in Ableton they're just called groups. So know that whenever I say bus, I'm just referring to a group in Ableton. So for the pluck, I hear this. Oh, actually, let me turn off the master too, because I'm like, yeah, this sounds pretty good. Uh, Sound to, but when I hear it, it sounds there's a lot of mid range in there, a lot of lower mid, and even when I heard the whole track together, there's like a lot of mid range going on. So I'm like, I already know that that's something I want to like tame a little bit. So on this simple EQing, really just took out that low mid range a bit. Let me kind of. There it's kind of woofy, opens up. You can hear more of the character of it. Uh, the main EQ is this 276, kind of lower mids.
What group is it on?
This is directly on the track itself. Yeah. So this track, he also sent. He means this has been produced. So there's also already I can hear a lot of saturation already. It's very bright, like in your face. So I did put a little saturation, but I was be careful not too much. Decapitator, you can see I've got the drive very low, but still able to brighten it up quite a bit. And then I added a little bit delay here, and again because this is like the main character of the song. So I want to really put a lot of effort into like giving this a big sound, and actually setting to some sends here, which I'm going to just turn off before and after. This delay I added to give it more body because sometimes it's like almost a room sound or like a slap delay. This one's a little more subtle, but here I'll so you can hear it exaggerated. It's almost like it's in a room, but like in a tight room, so it gives a little bit of ambiance. Also added some reverb to it, and then a little more like actual delay. And this delay is actually it's like give a little bit of energy. Let's go, man. And so it's like again, it's just a little more energy, a drive. It's a little more rhythm to it. And then finally give it some chorus. And you get this not only gives some volume, but it gives a lot of width too, so that this has a really big sound that's in your face. There's all that going on. And then so he in this track he also gave me a lot of these doubles to the pluck. So what I was showing you just there was this track. Close this. But there's like 7 or 8 other additional tracks, and you hear they're kind of similar, harmonically the same, but they're just layers of different sound. I think he was just trying to layer it and give it a lot of fullness. But I always felt I was able to get a lot of fullness out of the original one. So I looked at this like I look at vocals, where with a vocal, a lot of time you have the lead vocal, obviously, and that's what's at the front of the mix. That's what you hear. And all the other layers, like the harmonies, those are there to support it. But in the frequency spectrum, you can't have everything going on all at once, especially with something that's already so mid-rangey. So with a lot of these background vocals, I would just reduce the mid a lot. And so you can see, just scanning through, I just scooped out a lot of the mids on these, cut a lot of low end, cut high end on them. And you can already hear they're kind of a little lower in the mix, volume-wise. So again, and the point of that is because I just want them not to be, you won't hear them as much as the character, but they're there to just give it body. So you kind of, let me just show you what it's like on and off, and you'll hear how it is with it on there or not. So subtle, but it just gives a little more fullness on there. And I might even be able to like go back and turn up the volume a little bit, but I was just leaving it at that. So while we're here too, he added this pad, and it's just a held note. Usually a pad is, again, if you don't know, it's usually what you call a string or something that's a held note, and it's usually just give it kind of like a little bit ambiance where everything's a little more staccato or like more transient based. Though the thing I notice about it is it's also very much in the same frequency spectrum. It's also in that mid range. A lot of time the pad would be a string that's like an octave above and it's very high pitch. So because this is more in the mid range, I decided to uh, try and push it in the background. So I put a lot of reverb on it, um, both like regular just Valhalla reverb here, 100% mix, no pre delay. Plus killed a lot of the mid range as well. Threw some dimension expansion on there too, which is a sort of a delay slash reverb. And I did actually. It's both on the original. You can hear, but I added additional side chain. So because, which is a good point, because a lot of times something that's sustaining and something's in the background, like dance music, you're tending to be side chaining almost everything. So uh, I figured this is a good place to just do a lot of side chaining because it's in the background. You're not going to notice that pumping effect. And if you can save, not only if you can like help bring the kick to the front anywhere you can, plus if you can also reduce dBs coming out of that channel, which is something I'll go into a little bit more later, uh, it's going to allow you to get more loudness out of the track, which is something I'll talk about a little more in a bit. I'm going to get a little water here.
You're sculpting out low end on all of the mid range stuff.
Yeah. Um, I sculpt out low end on almost everything except kick and bass. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I do try and be again because I found a soothe you have to be really careful. If you don't know what soothe is, it's designed specifically to identify and reduce harsh frequencies. But I find if you crank it too much, it kills a lot of the character of the track. But in this case, I kind of want to kill the character because it's a background track and I don't want to pop into the front. So I almost use it for that. But if you're using on vocals or something that's in the present in the foreground, be very delicate with it.
It just like identifies it automatically, and I usually just like turn it up and down. But do you ever mess with the EQ band on there and stuff?
Yeah, I'll mess with the EQ band. Like I'll probably start with one of the presets, and then I'll mess with the EQ band. Also too, I'll mess with the mix because maybe you. Yeah, it's kind of a cool one, and it's kind of nice if definitely use the delta feature so you can hear what's being filtered out. Kind of is a nice thing um, to help out with to know what you're filtering. Sorry, excuse me.
Kickstart, I see you're actually doing the side chain to the kick. How can you do that rather than just the default?
Mostly because I like to see it. So now, because when you do it with the kick, you can see it, so that I know where I'm putting my curve. And so I'll do it to make sure I'm not going to do it right at the very end of it, but right as it's like maybe almost all the way gone. Because each track I'm deciding, like for me personally, how long my kick's going to be. And so it's not going to be the same every time. Can we turn on the AC?
Yeah.
All right, so that's kind of, I'll kind of go up the chain of the buses here. Excuse me. all the plucks into one, and then done a little additional processing there. Walk through that. So here I'm a little more crazy with the EQ. Again, focus is mostly on reducing the low mids, and then just slightly boosting the upper mids, just because that's why I want to reshape it. Excuse me. And you notice the little boost down here. I was noticing I lost a little body, so I wanted to bring that back in. I've got this EQ. I did very little with it, mostly because this EQ I find also just adds a little of its own character. It's a classic EQ. If you guys don't know, it's the Pultec EPQ. Most every plugin manufacturer makes their own version of it. So I just have UAD, so I use the UAD. I did do a little boost in 5K, but a lot of it's just kind of I threw it on. I like the character, gave it a little body, did a little more soothe. And then I have this additional Pro Q here. You notice that I didn't actually do anything with it. And this is something I'll get into later. I like they've got this masking feature where you can link it to another track and see. I don't have a lot of masking going on, but it'll show you a red line where you have overlapping frequencies between two tracks. And then that's not always bad, but what masking is when they actually one track is canceling out those frequencies. So in that case, you would want to reduce the frequencies of one of the tracks. Excuse me. All right, so then we go up to the bus, and usually I group all my instruments into one bus. Here, there's just the plucks and the pads, so there's not a lot, but it's part of my template. Just did some low end cutting on here just to make room for the low end. Again, little more side chain, and this was part of a template, but it's also I'm doing this to taste. Like as I'm mixing the whole track, I'm adding these things. So I probably at some point I noticed I want to do a little more side chain here. And then also side chaining here. This is track spacer. This is also side chaining, but this is a specific. It's not just a blunt tool like Kickstarter is, because Kickstarter's really made for kick. But this is actually for other things. And so I've got, you see down here, I've got the lead vocal as the input here. So let me just show you what this would look like. Go to the breakdown section here. So we have both the vocal and this going on. So it's actually ducking or like compressing or turning the volume down on the plucks as the vocal's coming out. So that's where, so it's only going to duck those when the vocals are there. And it's a nice way, you'll find it's a very quick and dirty way to make sure that your vocals are there in the front. Yep, it's exactly what it is. But it's just like, it's doing the full, it's much like, it's kind of like a compressor, but it's nice you can adjust the frequency spectrum. So like I'm not ducking in any low frequencies here. And you can adjust to be a narrower band as well. It's like if I'm doing more vocals, ducking, I'd use track spacer. And then if it's kickstart, because it's just easy. I mean, you can still do the classic compressor method of side chaining. And oh, yeah, I've tried that a little bit. I'd love to dive into it more. I just got used to track spacer. It's probably good. But I do notice that different side chains have different feels. So there will be times that I'll audition different ones until I find it to see which one I like best. So soothe in one case could be like sound better in one scenario. All right. So you're talking about like importance of like order or priority in tracks. So this is dance music. So the kick and that low end is just, it takes up the majority of the bandwidth on your track, and it's what drives it. So that I find obviously is the next most important thing. Um, so let's dive into the kick. I'll take off like what I've got here. I'll do both here too. So here's the kick as is. So it's fine. It's a little flat. It's a little like not a lot of tone to it, but it's punchy. It's a short kick as opposed to a long one. So just doing a little EQ at first. Most of what I did here, I always cut a little bit of low end of the very sub because you just don't need a lot of that. And it's really becomes problematic as you're doing more and more processing and getting it louder. And it makes it a little tighter and less muddy once you start cutting the very sub. And you'll see me do it throughout. I boosted a little bit in the mid areas. You can't hear it so much now, but as we hear the whole mix, I had noticed that wasn't hearing a lot of the kick in the mids. And like if you're listening to it on speakers that don't have a lot of low end, I feel like the kick has two parts, right? It's like a classic kick. If you hit it with, it's the boom, but also there's a click on top. That click on top is what helps punch it through the mid range and like makes it present, and then it gives you that and dance music is that constant tempo, and then giving you the driving dance beat of it. So I boosted those a little bit. This kind of new ozone tool that I like is very specific. It's kind of like a multi-band compressor saturator, but it's called like low end focus, and it's for bass and kick. And in my arsenal of things I play with, I'll test different things in different settings, and this one really seemed to like help out with giving a little more body to the kick. So that's without and with, and it's subtle. And I try and only do subtle changes because I'm going to build them up over time. But you're going to hear it get a little more body, a little bit more tone to it. This next one, drum bus, is a Ableton tool. It is very sensitive. So if you notice, I have the dry wet to 4% because this thing you turn on instantly, you hear it's so easy to overdo it. So I really am careful with this guy, but it does give it a very like strong, punchy sound. So adding, you hear a little bit more oomph to it. And here is a little bit more like of a trick you may not have heard of. So this is a multi-band compressor, fab filter. And so what I'm doing here is I'm compressing the sub area, and then, but I'm also, you'll see it's like expanding the bass. Because I heard it described once that your sub is like hits you in the stomach, and the bass hits you in the chest. So there are different feels, and we're almost kind of taking from the sub and adding to the bass here. And I find it's good because that's part of what it gives it that punch and that slam to really get it to punch the mix. So this is actually, I mean, I'll probably go to it more later, but there's a way to kind of sidechain this one to this band to this band. And you can see this one's going, it's moving kind of based on that one. So added just a little bit at 100, and then that's kind of it for just the pure kick processing. Well, actually, no, there's one other thing. I'm doing some parallel compression as well. You can hear, obviously, it boosts a lot on that. And really quickly, for anybody who doesn't know what parallel compression is, I'm basically, there's a send track. I'm sending the signal to this track and just compressing the heck out of it. And the compressed track on its own doesn't sound that great. It's very dry and just kind of empty. You wouldn't want that as your primary kick, but it is very driving. So you're kind of blending the two. So it's you've got two going on at the same time.
So how much are you sending it to? Because you can
Oh,
dial it up.
yeah. If you look in here, I've got -10 on here. So it's actually a decent amount. Um, but I thought I'd take this opportunity. When I did this, it presented a really interesting problem. Because first, when I did it, you can hear this. Yeah, I can hear this like this kind of weird additional tone, almost like a call and response. Here, I'll do. Sorry. All right. There's just a kick. Add the parallel, but it's kind of I don't know. It's adding this like sub echo to it. It's really crappy sounding. And I dialed all kinds of stuff, and I couldn't figure it out. And then what I did is I soloed the kick in the parallel, bounced it out to audio, and then this is the audio that I came up with, and I thought I'd show it to you. Just because it's actually the first time I came across this, and I thought it was really interesting. So you see, it actually expanded the decay, increased the decay on the kick. Um, I can't explain exactly why, but that's how I was able to troubleshoot my problem because I wanted to see the audio. So now I know what the problem is, and now I'm going to jump into my tool bag of transient design. And transient design is just a fancy way of saying like shaping the waveform. And the thing you're doing, either expanding it at the end, reducing at the end, or cutting off the beginning or adding to the beginning, making it sharper. So here, obviously, I have more tail than I want, so I'm going to reduce it. So one of the transient designers I like is just this Transient Master by Native Instruments. And here you can either increase the beginning or ends of it, or sorry, this is the beginning, like reduce the beginning or the end. So I was just like, let me cut it all the way. So I listened to it, and I still got a little bit. So it's driving me crazy. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to add another one. Yeah. And then it sounds way better. And like, okay, it had to take that much off of there. Now I think if I was just dealing with pure audio, there's other things I could do, but this is literally just going through my parallel, so it's in the processing. So I wanted to just take care of it, especially because I want to be able to show you what I'm doing here. But I thought that was an interesting problem that it came across, and that I hadn't before, so I want to show you how I solved it.
Can you explain a little bit more, like your decision to do the parallel processing? Like, what point are you like, okay, this needs parallel processing. I need to add a send.
To be honest, I'm showing you this soloed. But a lot of times when I'm mixing, I'm listening to the entire mix at once. So I just want the kick to be, it's really just punching through the mix. And so it's just the dry, like you, in this style, like you need the kick to be so present, and you can't just always turn it up. It's got to be really using all these mixing techniques that have been developed over time. And parallel compression is a very classic thing. You can use it really on anything. You can vocals, on bass. It's just a tool that mixing engineers have used for a long time. Anything they want to be more present and like have more body, use parallel compression. So it's really just to get that kick powerful, cutting through the mix, and really dominant. All right. So next logical thing after the kick is the bass. And on here, he gave me 3 different bass layers. Actually, let me add, are there any other questions so far?
I had like an online question here. Someone asked.
Yeah.
We can expand on this at the end if you want. Can you ask Marco to explain the multi-band compressor on the kick again? How do we link the sub and bass? I'm not sure.
Yeah. I've got it's kind of as a preset. So this is FabFilter. MB, the multiband compressor. So if you go into here, there's this setting where you set it to free, and then if I turn that off, then you see this. It pops up this little bar, and so you just set this bar to where do you want the sidechain to go, to be triggered from. So again, click free. You get this little bar to pop up, and then you just expand it to where you want the sidechain to be triggered from.
Okay, so you're not using just the A10 sidechain.
No, this is all internal with the multiband. So it's looking to its own. The word, I'll back up. The word sidechain is usually referring to a kick, to ducking everything, but it can be used for anything where one thing is being triggered by another. And usually it's compression related, where you want compression to happen as something else is happening. So in here, as that low end, that sub frequency is being compressed, it's triggering the bass frequency to be expanded. So it's compress, expand at the same time. And for anybody who doesn't know what expansion is, it's the opposite of compression. Compression, when a signal hits a threshold, that signal is reduced. Anything above that threshold is reduced. With compression, anything above the signal is expanded. And so the effect is with compression, you're reducing dynamics. With expansion, you're increasing dynamics. So with here, we're reducing the dynamics of the sub, increasing it of the bass. And this is all within the kick.
And that's the I have that's the streaky one, right?
Yeah, I did actually get this from Streaky.
Yeah, I've used this on the master bus in my first part of my mastering chain. I've never used it on the kick though. That's interesting.
Yeah. Actually, I'm using another Streaky technique on the master. You'll see.
Okay, I'll let them know to check out the streaky.
Yeah, he's pretty good. I mean,
Right,
yeah, he's got some great presets. It's actually nice because it's gives you things in short bites that are very quick and not long-winded. I like his stuff. Um, but I also too, I think this is something I'm using here, but I may not use on every track. Again, I'll just emphasize that you kind of have a toolkit of things, and I'll audition different things to get the effect that I want. All right. So with any other, I'll assume those are all the questions for now. So next up is the bass. He gave me 3 different bass tracks, and they all have they're very different character. So there is a sub, which is pretty simple. It's probably just a sine wave. Thing to note is it is sound. It's not. They're not held notes. There's already some sidechain on there. And the main thing I'd say I'm doing is just carving out its own space, taking off a little bit of sub, really low end sub, but really just cutting everything above 100 because I just don't need that, and I don't want it to interfere with the other bass layers. I like to add just a little bit of saturation, and it might be hard for people online to hear this unless you've got monitors, but
okay. Did you say cut everything above 100?
yeah. And that number is not static too. It depends on the key of the song and where I'm seeing the waveform. With this one, that's just where it chose to do it. If you want to be really exact, you can figure out what each note is and automate the EQ to be specific to each note. I chose to just take the easy route, but if you want to do it a little more, that's one tool. Again, I go really hardcore on the sidechain. There was already some sidechain, but I wanted to be a little more specific, so I just boosted there. Next, this is a plugin that I actually learned from Apu, and it's become my arsenal. It's sort of a multi-band compressor, but it also has just a very specific way it operates. It'd be a little more specific it's a little more sensitive, like in its attack. I find in general it's very sensitive, but I like it because it'll just compress like the lower region here, everything below 200, and I find it really just tightens low end. But I'm very sensitive with it. I only apply just a little bit of threshold because it's kind of like soothe. Too much, it just kills all the character. But it really will just make sure that that sub isn't blowing up your subwoofer. Finally, this again, I was just looking at this for masking. There's not doing any EQ. And then there is a mid bass. Now, this one was actually also an interesting kind of decision I had to make as well. I actually think this pretty cool sound. It's got like this echo delay on it. I almost feel like a sound like that could be like a lead sound in the song. But the problem is we've already got the pluck, which is very dominant. And if I'm letting this just be as is, it's fighting with it. And it's just because they both want to have that voice of being present and like really driving the song. So I opted to really reduce a lot of the character of it and push it more in the background, so that it's not interfering with that pluck. And I can kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So I'll do it with and without that processing. So I don't know if you could hear, but without it, they're kind of fighting for that presence in the mix. But it's also, but I didn't want to kill it completely because it's a lot of the driving part of the rhythm of the song. So I just reduced, it's kind of almost like cutting off the top end of it a bit. But added some compression to give it just a little punch because it is a percussive part of the song. Obviously, some side chain, and then I think this EQ again was just for checking masking later. Then he had another bass, which is also more almost like a melodic element. Similar thing, because it's very melodic. I didn't want it to fight with the pluck, so I did reduce the EQ on it a bit. Then aside from that, just some EQ and compression. Compression you can kind of hear before and after. It's the original sample. Yeah. Uh, it is an interesting thing though. It is very for a bass. A lot of times you think of bass just going down the center. A lot of times you want to mono it, everything below a certain frequency. But because this is almost acts like a pad, where because it's a held note, I use the Ableton Gain or sorry utility plugin, which I've relabeled Gain here. I monoed everything below 120. So mono just means it's non-stereo. Right. So let's just kind of hear what those sound like together. So you got a nice drive from the bass, like a nice rhythm from the bass, but like that drive from the kick. And let's add the pluck in there. So what I'm listening for here is that every kind of occupies its own frequency range. Because if you start really listening to it, those plucks own the mid range. The bass owns low, mid, and low. The kick owns the punch of the song. And there's going to be more processing going on because and there's no master on this right now, so it will sound a little bit different and better once the master's on there. There's some effects here. I don't think there's not much to go into here. If you know anybody knows EDM, whoa, sorry. You got your classic like build of like white noise. You know, you try and get creative with this kind of stuff. But what I did want to do with that, because again, it's a bit mid-rangey, is I wanted to spread it out to the left and right. Because again, the pluck, which is our kind of main voice of the song, or this part of the song, is owning the center. I want to push it out to the sides. And so I just use the Haas effect. And if you guys don't know what that is, it's just a kind of like a auditory trick. It's actually a delay, and it breaks signal into two, and it's such a minute delay that your ear doesn't hear it as two notes, but it does hear it as being pushed out to the far left and right of the channel. So I'll show it to you before and after. So it's the, so you can really feel it go from like here to here in the stereo mix. And once you hear with everything else, it really helps it. Without it, it's kind of blended there with everything. And with it, you hear it separated out so it can exist with everything at the same time, but be still being heard as separate.
I think it might be interesting to also talk about the amount of delay between these two. Like, what were you using?
I have a default that I use. Sometimes I will adjust the number of milliseconds to try and get a different sound, but to be honest, I just slap on my default. I think but when I learned about it, however many years ago, I just created my own preset, and that's what I use every time. Yep, yeah, 4 milliseconds, a certain number of feedback. And anybody trying to recreate this, I'm not going to go and recreate it. You can YouTube that. It's pretty easy, and I'm sure you can do it on almost any delay plugin, and there might even be plugins just dedicated to it now. So just know it's called the Haas effect, HAAS. And then here's again where I use track spacer because there are vocals going on at this point, and so and a pluck too. So I wanted to duck it to that, and then obviously cutting any low ends. I chose to do a little automation here, and I'll get into this a little bit more later.
Is your track spacer automated also to turn on when the vocals come in, or is it just left on?
I just left on because it only by default it's only triggered when there's an input signal. So the vocals come in, that's when it starts ducking. All right, so finally we'll get to the vocals. I mean, a lot of times the vocals will be like a predominant part of your track, and if anybody who works in pop, this is gonna be much more important than your kick and everything else. But I left this for last just because it's not occurring in the drop itself. Also, too, a lot of times with vocals, you're gonna have a ton of tracks. You have your lead and all kinds of doubles and harmonies and ad libs. This, he gave me a very simple one. It's actually this guy, Blake Weisner. Yep, who this gentleman knows. He's a really talented singer, and if you like his vocals and want to get in contact with him, just ping me. I'll let you know. Shout out to Weisner. He did a really nice job here, and I'm assuming, I don't know, he's an amazing producer on his own too, so he probably processed the vocals as well. So I'm not going to actually get into like auto tune and a lot of editing, but I will show you just enough to know like a lot of basics that you'll need to do with editing vocals. And it's also too, it's one track, so it makes it a little easier. I think a key thing that I learned that I like and I don't always see a lot of people doing is a lot of manual adjusting of breaths and de-essing. So just going into the clip gain and turning it down when there are either breaths or you hear an S or a T, those things that really pop out. So I'll just kind of show you what I mean. I think we went into what, so here,
It won't be that easy.
so you can hear him go easy and like breathe out then in, which normally if you just hear somebody doing that, it's no big deal. But the thing is, once we get into producing, we're adding a lot of effects on there, compressing it. So those small things pop out to the front. So you want to kind of correct that and turn it down. So on the clip gain here, I've turned it down, and it's a little hard to tell because I've got all the clip turned down. So here normally everything else turned down like let me check here. Turned down to like 11. With this, I turned it all down to 16. So took down 5 dB of gain. You don't want to get rid of it completely because you still want it to sound like a human. It's a real person singing there, but you also don't want it overwhelming you. Now, I don't have an example of it here, but I would also do that kind of manual editing for any S's. Because again, an S in normal speak, you're not noticing it, but that sound, it's a non-harmonic thing. It's more of a noise, and it's very strong. And when you compress everything and saturate it, it's just like the breath. It really pops out to the front, and it's actually kind of harsh to listen to. So anywhere where you hear an S, let's see if we can find one here.
Stars just to find you. I always kept you in focus. Held
Yeah, there
my
we go. I think it's actually the S is right here. So if this isn't too bad, but if it was normal, if I was just had to edit this from the ground up, if it wasn't like sent to me already kind of edited, I would go in and turn down the clip gain on the S's. Usually I'd start with 4 dB, but from taste from there. Let's see. So I think little things too. I did notice there was this little section here that was a little out of time uh, for my taste just before the drop. So I did edit this right here. There was just one word that didn't come in right at the right time, so I moved it so it was really in time. Because the one thing to make your vocals sound really professional is if they're also in rhythm, and that's going to really make it sound good and like a good song. So really spent a lot of time on that. I mean, aside from this one edit, I think he did a great job, so there's not much work for me to do. But in the processing itself, diving into plugin world, you can see I've got a fair amount of things that I did on here. I'm a big fan of Vocal Writer. It's kind of emulating what people like before there was digital world would do is they would listen through the track and record the automation of them actually moving the fader up and down. So it's just volume. And it's kind of like compression where you set let's see, let's just play it so you can see what I'm talking.
held my emotions, but couldn't get too close. We fall
You see
apart.
this right here.
I know I
I
kept
said
my
it's like a
distance not
threshold.
to
So
hurt us,
anything
but I
below
wanna
it, it turns
what
up a
you
gain.
do. It
Anything above
just
it,
one
it turns down the
touch.
gain.
So now I'm stuck.
And so, but then you can set how much gain it'll give. Um, but it's not compressing. It's not got a ratio where it's turning it down by a certain percentage. It's literally just volume. So it's kind of a nice, like very like human way to do it at first to catch peaks, and then you can add compression later. I did have different sections of the vocal. I didn't break them off in their own section, and you can see I automated each one to go on and off in each section, so I could set a different threshold and a different volume maxes and levels. Let's see, those are the vocal rider. Then I just use this plugin. It's really kind of geared towards vocals. Really just give it presence, high end and mid range presence. Again, it's like I think it's like one of those combinations, saturation and compressor plugins. Where it's very specific. Just kind of turn the knob to kind of get it where you want. But I find it really helps the vocals get to the front of the mix. And then going for a very classic compressor. Um, I find a lot of these classic plugins have their own sound, which have kind of proven to be pretty good, especially on vocals. So I use the 1176 for compression, and then the both the Pultec, uh, EQs. Again, not doing too much, just very subtle moves. I felt like there was a little bit of nasaliness in here, so I was cutting that with this at 700 to cut it just like a couple dB, and then just boosted at 5K with this one. It's not doing too much, but also part of the reason of using them is get a little bit of characteristic of those plugins. Just even if there was no EQ, what the kind of sound and warmth they would add on their own. Uh, Also, too, there was already some reverb on the vocal itself, but I noticed there was a little bit of like it was cutting out a little bit here and there.
Hurt us, but I wanna what you.
I don't know if you heard the it was almost like the reverb went away for a sec, and I thought that was a little jarring. So to kind of bridge that, I added a little bit more reverb on it too.
But I wanna what
So
you do.
you still like soloed, you still hear the ducking a little bit, but I feel like in the mix, it still gives a little more continuity. Um, to be honest, I came across it in my plugins. I'm like, let me try this one out. I normally use Valhalla Vintage Verb, but occasionally I like to try something new, and I just kind of like the sound of it. So I don't know this plugin that well, but it gave it a little bit different characteristic, kind of like a little more. Um, to be honest, like I've been listening more to Daft Punk lately, and it gave a little Daft Punk sound. So I was like, hey, this is kind of fun. So added it. And then here's like an automated plugin. This is kind of like if you don't know it, like the Isotope Neutron. The Isotope they're mainly known for Ozone, which is for mastering, and for a while now they've had this feature where it's kind of auto mastering, and they have this Neutron where it's kind of like an auto mixing for any track, and it can detect if it's vocal or not. So I do this sometimes where I mix a track to where I like, but just to kind of see what else can happen, I'll let it like trigger the auto feature and see what it does. Almost never do I keep it as is. It's kind of like, and this is a side note on where I think I see kind of like AI being used in the future, because I definitely see it. It's coming. We're gonna be using it, but I see it as like at least at first, maybe like 20 years, it'll just do everything for us with the click of a button. But until then, I think it's gonna be like we'll use it as a tool and let it kind of detect things, but then we select, because again, this is also art, right? There's no one way to do this. So whether I know it or not, I kind of have a creative vision for how I'm mixing it, with the reference tracks or my personal taste or what I've been told by whoever I'm mixing for. So I'm going to see, okay, what tastes and flavors can this give me? And what of it do I want to keep? So I ran this and it gave me an exciter, way too much, killed it. Give me two compressors. One of them is too much, so I killed it. Second compressor was like, okay, I like what it's doing, but I laid off on the threshold because it was just way over compressing it. But I did like it give me a little bit. Oops. I did like some of the EQ it was giving me, especially this boost I hadn't thought of around in the low mids. Like, hey, I like that. And then it's got this what they call Sculptor. I think it's just a multi-band compressor, but with a lot of bands. And I liked what it was giving me, but I did tweak a little bit. I backed off on the mix. I turned down the amount of processing. So, there'll probably be some purists who are like, hey, you can't use any automated things. But I'm like, hey, let's use whatever you want. And again, I'm not relying on it. I'm just kind of, it's another tool in the toolkit. Give me a little bit of flavor. And also, too, like, if you've ever had a happy accident, having ideas that you didn't generate on your own are great. And they will produce things that you hadn't thought of before. So it's almost like having somebody else in the room be like, hey, did you try that? Like, yeah, let's try that. But I did notice that at the end of my processing, it was still those S's were still popping out. So I threw another de-esser on there. Uh,
Can you show how the de-essers work? Because I want to use those, but I've never had like really good success with them.
uh, I'd say like, let me go to the section where he's talking one more staccato.
That everything will be that easy.
Okay.
Travel through the stars just to find you.
I'm just noticing more of the S's and T's popping
When
out.
we get too close, we fall apart. I know I kept my distance not to hurt us, but I wanna what you do.
Now it's subtle, but it's taming a lot of those S's and T's, which really, now that I've compressed it and saturated it, are really popping out more. Yeah, yeah. I'll do one section so you can really hear it.
Travel through the stars, just to 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 find you. Travel through the stars, just to find you. Travel through the stars, just to find you. Travel through the stars, just to find you.
I know it's subtle, but again, I think that's like once you start mixing more, you want to really make subtle moves. Like a lot of your big moves with like tools like compressors and stuff, that's what you do in your production phase, like where you're shaping the sound. A lot of mixing, if the track is good, and I think he's a pretty good producer, so he didn't give me garbage. So it's going to be subtle moves on this, and it's just something I noticed that I wanted to really tame. How are we doing for time? Okay, cool. All right, I think we're pretty on track. So I think the final thing with vocals, there is this background. Um, it's a drawn out thing. It's like a pad, and here it is together. Now it's the same note, also held. They're both held, so it's kind of two things going on. There's not a lot of variation. So I wanted to also make this, reduce some of the mids on this. So let's see. But actually, no,
Is that just a section copy pasted and stretched out?
it could be.
Actually sung. It sounds like it's just been.
I think it is drawn out. You know what? I'm actually seeing two. I probably would want to push this also in the background a little bit more. So personally, I'd probably throw a little bit more reverb on it. Actually, probably grab the reverb from here, and because if you don't know it with mixing, you think of it as you've got multiple dimensions. You've got front to back, which I've kind of been talking about when I'm saying present or in the background, with left to right, and then kind of up to down. With like up to down being like the more low you have, more it feels like it's down the bottom, more high up the top. In this case, so there's a very classic thing. If you want something in the background, reverb and to make it quieter. So, or shave off the top end. So in this case, actually probably I'm thinking now like that I could hear this being even more in the background. So pushing. So kind of subtle, but at least it gets it. It's not so present, but it's kind of low in the mix, so it's not super important. I think they blend pretty well. My main thing here that I was focusing on was giving a lot of width so that it's dominates the sides where the lead dominates the middle. So, and I was pretty drastic in when doing this. Let's see. Yeah, okay, let's hear this section. A bead. So you can hear I was pushing it out to the sides, and I wasn't doing much with work on the lead. So now they kind of both occupy their own area. So the lead is down the middle, and the the background is on the sides. Uh, yeah.
So how come you use ozone there to spread it wide instead of offsetting this?
You mean with like a Haas effect? Probably I can, yeah, I can control the mount, and I find they both have their own characteristics. The Haas, I find it doesn't work on everything, and because it does sometimes it feels like louder in one channel than the other, and I find the Ozone's a little smoother of a widener. Um, yeah, it's kind of like I just know how both of them sound, and I didn't want the Haas effect sound on this. Um, yeah. Are there? I'm curious. Are there any other questions of the chat so far?
No, that was it so
All
far.
right, cool. A couple other things I'm doing with the vocal. I'm sending what I call a vocal throw. It's just kind of a fancy way of saying what I call surgical delay. So if you look in the automation here, I've only used it in 3 places. And this is kind of more of a creative decision, which I'd probably tell uh, my friend who I'm mixing for, like, hey, I did this. Tell me if you want to keep it or not, because I feel like this is getting a little bit into the production side. But I heard it and I was like, let me try this. So I just added, you'll hear just like an additional delay.
Be that easy.
And that's it. Just that additional, like basically duplicating that. Because it just to keep a little bit of like excitement going in the gaps. So a little call and response. Again, I've only added it a couple places.
Fall apart. I know I can't
Then I did do a little bit of delay just to add a little excitement to it. Very subtle.
fall apart. I know I kept my distance not to hurt us.
And then
Fall
in general with like my send effects, uh, I'll do a decent. I'll be side chaining them. If this only occurs in the breakdown, so there's no drop, there's no kick. If it was in the breakdown, I mean, sorry, in the drop, I would add a side chain it to the kick, but I don't have to worry about that here. But I will side chain it to the lead vocal, and this is kind of a very powerful thing because especially when you get into effects, you don't want to. It can get overwhelming and really confuse the listener for what's the predominant thing. So I with reverbs and delays, I'll sidechain them to the lead vocal. And again, using track spacer here. So you can kind of hear if I just solo that. So so it's really just kind of popping out in the spaces between the vocals. So there's not too much confusion or extra noise going on when he's singing. And then I'll also cut out a little bit of the middle. And this plugin is a very just simple one. It's really just I've used it because it has a way of cutting everything in the middle versus everything on the sides, and I just took it down in the middle by 2 dB. And then also I widened it. Same thing, ozone for widening it. And okay, and I think that is it for the vocals. So that's kind of my first phase of mixing. Getting getting processing. And I'm realizing I actually skipped a step where if I go back to the very beginning, right when I'm dropping everything into the mix, I'm pulling all the stems in. I kind of just for demonstration sake, I have all the original stems up here, so you can kind of hear the before, and show you like what I did to really initialize the mixing session. And there's actually a really important step. I'm sorry that I'm kind of doing it out of order. Just to not pretend that I said this at the very beginning. So I get the stems, they're all here. I drop them in the session, and then I go to what I consider the peak section, and let's just listen to what that sounds like. Let me make sure the master is off. Yes, it's off. Sorry. No. Okay. Big thing you'll notice, the master is overloading by like 7 dB, which you don't want to happen. But I will point out, notice it doesn't really sound that bad, right? It actually it's not, I don't hear a lot of audible distortion. It doesn't sound like overly compressed. I'll show it to you again. And this is a little side note. And it's sort of unrelated to what I'm going to go to next. But there's a whole other method of mixing. It's somewhat new. It's used in a lot of styles like dubstep called mix to zero. And they do this where they will actually intentionally slam the master like that. And what they're doing is they're allowing the DAW itself to do what's called clipping, which is, I'll get into, well, no, I'll get into now. Clipping is where it's different than compress. You can call it kind of like compression, but it's different. It's still anything above a threshold, it's going to affect, but instead of reducing the signal, it just eliminates it. It cuts it off. And I'll show you a plugin that kind of like visualizes that. But it's allowing the DAW to do the clipping because if you get into it, Ableton, these other DAWs, I don't want to get too technical, but it will actually clip for you if it's going above it. And you can only do that in the digital realm. And that's why it doesn't sound bad. Other times it will sound bad, but I just thought it was a kind of cool thing to point out that's why it doesn't sound bad. Why doesn't it sound bad? But I've seen redlining it. It's red. Red is bad. I know I'm not supposed to have it be red. Which is, I want to give myself like a headroom of about 6 to 4 dB into the master before I do any processing on the master. So I want my master here to show it about 4 dB. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn down the clip gain. And side note, clip gain versus fader. This is the fader here, and then the clip gain is what I've been working with up to now is this gain knob right here, which is for the sample itself.
Real quick, sorry. Can we just switch to the vertical source on OBS for Instagram?
You sure?
Yeah. In the vertical source, yeah. We just got to switch to it. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, wow. It's been that way the whole time, huh?
Yeah. I haven't been seeing anything.
That's hilarious.
I just realized that. You can get to it. Also, is there a way to have that camera up there in this view? Yeah. Can you add a source to just put your camera? Sorry, guys.
In which scene? The vertical scene?
In
the screen scene?
Yeah, just add a boost. Yeah, just tell them, so sorry. It's supposed to be video as well.
All right, this if you're getting a little side lesson in OBS here.
They can still hear it.
Yeah, I'll put it over here so you can see the mask. All right, well, they're not going to be able to see the master, but whatever. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right, so I'm saying clip gain versus fader. So you can think of like the clip gain is the gain of the sample itself as the source, and then you have all your processing, and then you have the fader. And rule of thumb, use the fader as little as possible as you're starting your mixing. Also, a way to think about it, the clip gain is what you want to do to affect just that sample. With a fader, it's used more to balance between the different tracks. I, as a rule of thumb, will start with mostly just work the clip gain. There are other reasons for it too, because as you're doing your processing, you add compression, saturation, EQ, those all boost the gain a little bit. Now you can make it so they don't, but in reality, you're going to be adding and adding and adding. And this is especially important in production as well. You want to make sure your clip gain, you've got a lot of headroom. So when you are adding all that processing and adding gain, by the time you get to the fader, if the fader is turned down, you're going to think that you've got all this headroom, but you could be overloading the channel and actually really affecting the sound in a really detrimental way. Overcompressing, squashing, making a very brittle sound, which ultimately makes it really hard to deal with later on. So I'll initiate my mix working just with the clip gain. And I'll start with the kick because the kick is going to take up the majority of the bandwidth on your track. So if I solo the kick, I just as a rule of thumb want to give myself like 10 dB of headroom on the kick track itself. So looking at this track, now it's almost at 0 right now. So in this case, it was pretty easy. I just turned it down 10. So now my kick channel is 10. The ultimate goal is to make sure that your master channel is between 6 and 4 dB of headroom. So the next steps I would do is I would just make everything match my kick. I'll just turn the rest of the tracks down by 10 dB as well. And that would be my starting point. Now, I'll probably do like a little bit. Now, let's go back to the peak. Now I've got about 4 here. I like to get a little bit more. So in reality, I'm probably going to go in and adjust each of these a little bit and almost do like a preliminary mix to get all the levels where I want, and also turning down the gain. So I've got 4 to 6 dB of headroom on the master. And that's a starting point. And then that's the step that I skip before going into processing each one. But I think it's important because that's really, it's called gain staging. And if you've heard that term, it's kind of thrown around a lot. And what I find is a lot of misinformation. But it's really just turning, like adjusting your gain to give you headroom, 4 to 6 on the master, but also adjusting in the right places, so that you're not fooling yourself with like false moves on the fader. Another reason why you don't want to use the fader so much in the beginning is you don't want to make huge fader moves because the fader is different in sensitivity, different where it is on the stroke of the fader. So if you're turning it down a lot, the moves become more minute and it's just not as sensitive, and so it just the sound isn't quite as good. So the fewer moves you're making at first, the better. Obviously, you're going to use the fader because you want to balance everything. I'm not saying don't use it, but just for initializing, start with the gain. Yeah, yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, mine's pretty similar. Like I mostly focus on the kick and sub as like the anchoring, to be between 10 and 12 as well. So I'll shoot to get them both between 10 and 12. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, and then like that again, these are starting points. Like you said, it's kind of your own formula. Um, from there, like I find like if I go down too much, then the problem can be the opposite. I know I personally never want to like push the fader above zero. It's probably okay. That's just a personal thing. You probably it's the digital world, so you're actually not going to hurt anything. But I just personally don't like to do it. So I don't want to turn my clip gain down so much that I'm going to be in a position where I have to turn the fader above zero. So when you say like drum bus 17, that sounds like a lot to me. But if that works for you in your workflow, then do it. Oh, okay, sub 17. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm probably doing it. Let's see what I did for the sub here. I mean, for me, it works there, and I think I just home. These are the. I'm going to the actual track. All right, sub ended up being at 10, and I just took 3 dB. So yeah, yeah. For this, I just kind of also relied on the fader too. I think also too a good thing. I mean, is that can I answer your question? Yeah, I mean, I'm do pretty similar to what you do, but I think I'm a little bit more by ear. So, but it is starting with the cake and the sub, just kind of getting down there. I think, but that does not bring up a thing that I didn't mention before too. Is well, actually, let me pause on that. Let me get into this too. So, any other questions with that so far? Okay, so I've talked about out of order, but phase one, gain staging. Phase two, doing the processing on the tracks. Now, phase three for me is loudness. And loudness you get on the master, but also you can do by clipping, which I mentioned before. Uh, and again, clipping is anything that goes above a certain threshold, the clipper just chops it off completely. Now, why do you clip? It's not necessarily like compression where you want to get a different sound. It's mostly, I mean, you can do it for that. The majority of the time, you're using a clipper for loudness. And why does the clipper get you loudness? Well, it's not actually, the loudness doesn't come from the clipper itself, but the fact that it is saving you headroom. So what I mean by that is if I go into like one of these tracks, I'm gonna go into I think my mid bass. Let's try this. So I'll just close the plugins I did for that. I, I'm gonna use this. I've got two clip ears here. I originally used. I like this Kazrog one. It's just kind of very transparent, but I'm gonna open this other one because it's a little more visual and shows you a little bit more what a clipper does. Yeah, I honestly like AB like standard clip. I feel like certain things preserves a little bit more of the high end and presence, but I feel like I can crank K clip and more, and it sounds more consistent. So here I like this because it shows you what's happening. It's a little small, but you can see anything in red. It's just chopping the top of that waveform off. And so if we look at the track itself, so I will put a clipper on the master, but I'm showing you on individual tracks. So right here, it's just on this sub, on this mid bass. So here, let me set it so you can see the fader itself. So here's the mid fader. So I'll keep it going. So without the clipper, it's going up to 27. Then with the clipper, I've gained about a dB and a half of headroom. So it's but the so it's 28 and change versus 27. Now a dB and a half doesn't sound like a lot, but if I'm doing that on all my channels, like that adds up. So you're reducing the amount of volume and gain that's going into the master. So that allows you to get more. So it's doing two things. It gives you the headroom, but also two, you got. It's kind of like this give and take. It's like the way a compressor works. The reason why you can get like volume from a compressor sometimes is because the makeup gain. And what's happening is you're turning down the the loud frequencies and basically turning up the quiet frequencies. So that's why it sounds louder because those quiet frequencies are louder. The clipper is kind of similar. It's where you're chopping off the top of the really loud peaks so that when you're turning up the gain elsewhere in your track, those quieter frequencies are going to come up in volume, and that is perceived loudness. So it sounds louder. So again, by doing it just on here, you're not going to hear that loudness gain, but I'm saving myself headroom so that I can start cranking on the master. So I do this on a lot of my tracks. And it's specifically on tracks where it's a lot of transients. Things where there's a held note, you're not going to really get a lot. But things like drums, yes, there's going to be a lot going on there, and you can chop a lot there. So I'm just going to show you. This is another clipper. This is the one I use mostly. And you're not going to hear a lot of difference and when it's on and off, but that's by design. I'm not doing this to really shape the sound. I'm really just doing this to give myself gain down the line. So I will turn up the threshold until I hear it affecting the sound and then back off because I've already dialed in everything, the sound I want, so I'm not here to affect the sound. So I'm going to do as much as I can before I'm affecting the mix. But on here, you're seeing I'm gaining another 2 dB of headroom without affecting the overall sound too much.
So it's usually the last thing you put on the chain.
Mostly, yeah.
Will you ever put it on a kick?
Yeah, I did put it on the kick here, but I will. But in general, the really big low end things, you have to be a lot careful because it can really distort it more quickly. And for loudness, now this is Oxford Inflator. Excuse me. Give me one sec here. Now this will give it volume, a noticeable gain volume. I mean, perceived loudness. And Oxford Inflator is this combination tool. It's a saturator, it's a clipper. But what it's really unique for is it's got this effect feature, which has a unique way of getting loudness. And maybe technical, if you read the manual, it says something like it increases the probability of loud samples over quiet ones, which I don't know exactly what that means. So I just turn the knob and it gets some volume or perceived loudness. Um, so let's just listen to clipper. And then if you really drive it, it becomes a hard clipper. Um, hard clipper, soft clip. Soft clip tries to emulate more what happens with analog gear, where it's more of a soft, more just less aggressive feel. Where hard clip, and if you looked at the waveform, it's actually instead of just doing a flat chop, it'll chop, but it'll kind of curve the edges. It goes into it. Um, honestly, I like hard clipping in a lot of places. It's a little bit more aggressive, but it's more punchy to my ears, depending on the setting. But like with drums, give it more of a punch. Um, so let's see. Let's just so let's kick. Let's make sure volume is not too crazy. So without now, to me that definitely sounds louder. One thing I like to do when I'm using a tool like this, or honestly, most other plugins like compressors, because like I said before, things like even an EQ can add gain to your track. It'll push up the overall gain. And in general, loudness sounds better. And so if you just put a plugin on and let's say it's EQ and things sound better, you could being deceived just that it's making it louder. So one thing I try and do is make sure that the overall uh, like channel gain isn't going up. Not that you don't ever want to go up, but just for me, I want to make sure I'm not being deceived uh, just by a gain boost. And because what I want from the inflator is not a gain boost, I want perceived loudness. I want to hear it loud, but not necessarily gain boost. So you notice I did reduce. I turned up the effect to 100 and did push the input so to try and get a little clipping, but I did turn down the output. And it's because I didn't want this to go. Let's see, I think I was trying to get this flat. So if you look at the channel volume here, it's negative 13. I turn on inflator. It's going up a little bit, but it's pretty much staying the same. And that's by design. So this truly tells me I am getting perceived loudness without turning it up. I mean, because you can get loudness just by turning up gain, but I don't want to turn up gain because I still want headroom on my master. So I want perceived loudness. So that's just something I do to make sure that I'm really getting the effect of the tool. Anybody have any questions? I feel like they got a little technical. Any questions on the chat or anything? Okay. That makes sense? Okay, cool. All right, so I'm not going to do it on everything, but I'll put inflator definitely on my kick, my bass, probably have it on my drums.
Does it have like a preset, or do you kind of just start?
It
Do you start up usually on it?
honestly, this is one of that I'd say that's the one drawback of this tool. It does not have a lot of. It's got like two presets. It's like loud and louder. I think where are they? Like factory, yeah, max loudness, smooth. It's like okay, great. So I've just kind of dialed it in. I think Apu has got one where it's like 30, 30, 30 on the effect, 30 on the curve, but this is one of those ones where I suggest reading the manual. It's not fun. I've read the manual 3 times because it's really complicated, but it's if you want to, I think if you get to the stage like in getting loudness, I'd suggest it. I mean, read the manual for all your plugins. It's tedious and takes time, but it really helps you like understand what you're doing. So that's everything I do before doing the mastering. So again, I'll just double check before diving into the master. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? Okay.
What was your structure? You said first gain staging, second something, third loudness.
Yeah, gain staging, like effects processing, which is also kind of leveling, making sure like, if this is too loud, I'll turn it down. So yeah, processing and leveling, and then loudness, and then finally mastering. Yeah.
I wasn't here for your gain staging. Do you have like a process you do? Like, do you VU meter it?
I don't do. I use VU meter. I know that's kind of like classic way, but we did go into it a bit, so I'll just do it really quickly. Start with the kick. General rule of thumb, I'm going for like negative 10, negative 12 on the kick channel itself. On the channel itself. So negative 10, and then that's the raw sample before any processing. Do a similar thing with the sub, then turn everything down to match that.
You getting the sub to 10 as well?
Yeah, or 10 or 12 around there. Because I say 10 to 12 because I'm looking. My ultimate goal is negative 6 dB to 4 dB on the master, and so depending on the mix, it'll vary. Then I'll adjust all the other tracks to match those. Excuse me. All right. See how we're doing for time. No, just cumulative. Yeah. So I'll start. My starting point is negative 10 on the kick and sub. Add everything else, match that, and then take a look at the master. If I need a little more headroom, I'll turn everything else down. Depends. I mean, I'll kind of do like almost like a initial mix there, and so if the mix is how I like, then I'll just turn everything down. Yeah.
So you're talking in the context of you're mixing with audio stems.
Mm-hmm.
When you're doing it, the production of it, you have your kick sample.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. You take that kick sample, which is always like super loud from splice.
Yeah.
You go to the gain, you turn it down.
Yep.
Well.
Yep.
And you turn down the gain of the volume from like the synth itself.
If it's synth, yeah, I do it in the synth. Surprisingly, some synths don't have a master out, so I would just use the utility tool in Ableton, which I think you guys know, but I'll just pull it up.
So you always catch the volume
From the very beginning, because again, because in production, similar to this, you're going to have a lot of effects. Like a lot of people are doing sound design, right? And you're using compression, EQ, saturation to design your sound, both within the synth and with outside of it. So again, I don't want to be fooled by adjusting my fader into like over squashing or over processing the sound design. And it's just easier to do it within the synth. Turn it down there, or use the utility tool and just turn down the gain from the beginning. All right, so let's go to the master. On this, I did just a little bit of effects, and this is also something where I probably is a little bit of a creative decision. So I go to True Colors and ask him if he's cool with this. But just quickly, I felt when I was playing around with it that there wasn't. I want a little bit more impact between the verse and the drop. So let's see. Well, I'll just kind of play it. Let's see what I'm talking about. Why did the volume just... Okay. I wanted a little bit more impact between that verse section or build and the drop itself. So I just subtly turn the gain down by 1 dB over time before that. So as soon as the drop comes in, whole thing goes up by 1 dB, and it's like, wow, okay, it's just because like dance music is all about the suspense and release. So you want this build to build, tension building, and then this like satisfying, energetic drop. And this is just one of those little tricks that helps achieve that end. All right, so that was one thing I did there. That's it. I did that in both the drops. Go back to the master. So I just a little note on metering. Like I showed you, I'm a big fan of Metric AB. I've got my references loaded in here. It's also what I use to check loudness. And I use LUFS, which I think is pretty standard at this point, as method of checking loudness. I usually target between 7 or to hit about 6 to 7.5. But it depends on the genre too. Each genre will depend. If you're doing dubstep, you're probably going like 4 or 5, right? Like,
Like Spotify and whatever you're uploading on, they have different volumes they prefer as like their standards, like YouTube versus Spotify.
yeah, and I'm actually not totally clear on how they translate that from the track you have. I think they do normalize it, but the loudness will also affect the sound too. So, like with dubstep, you want that squashed sound. So by making the overall loudness, like by squashing it down to like 5 LUFS, you're getting a particular sound. Like if you had a dubstep song that was like 9 LUFS, but was like you turned up to the same level, they're gonna sound different. So it's also like a creative choice as well as. But yeah, I know what you're saying. I don't really think about that so much when I'm mixing, um, but that's a good point.
Most engineer friends that are like in the game, they don't even worry about it. And I remember there was a time where I used to aim for the -12, -14 LUFS, and
Yeah.
my song sounded quieter on Spotify.
Yeah,
I stopped doing that.
yeah, because I think it's like you're doing it to the track itself. They're gonna do it just to everything afterwards. But like again, like a song that it's think of it like compressed, like a compressed song versus uncompressed song sound different, even if afterwards you make them like sound volume wise the same. It's almost like the fader thing, right? If you can compress the hell out of one track, leave one track clean, and make the faders make it so it's the same gain, but they're gonna sound totally different, right?
Kind of goes back to that perceived loudness thing. I mean, if you think if
Exactly.
you're joining or clipping a track, you're bringing up that low stuff that you're not really hearing as well. So it's like even if it's peaking in the same place, you're getting a louder sound.
Yeah.
So you shoot for -7
From 6 to 7.5 for and that, but that's for my personal tracks. If I'm mixing for somebody else, I'll ask for references, check what the references are, and then try and match that. Because like if you get into like a chill melodic house track, it might get up to like 8 or 9, where they're not trying to squash the heck out of it. So it can be depending on genre.
A lot of like progressive house and melodic techno stuff. So kind of in that same genre, I feel like it's probably around what you're mixing.
Yeah, techno I feel like tends to be a little more squashed. Yeah, I feel like the more chill it is, like the lighter they are on the left.
Marco, I didn't remember your answer from
Yeah.
earlier. Are you throwing that on the master channel prior to mixing or after finishing?
The Metro KB.
Yeah.
I do it's like part of my template. I just drop it on there. So I will reference it as mixing individual elements too. And also too, just side note, I guess like I'm showing you individual tracks, but a lot of times it's best practice. You don't want to mix track just by itself. You're listening. It's usually best to listen to the whole mix and make your adjustments to that track as you're listening to the whole mix, because you're not. Part of mixing is making everything work together. You're not trying to make a perfect sounding single track, because honestly, like if you sometimes when you listen to the track by itself, it sounds a little neutered, but in the context, it'll sound perfectly fine. All right, so let's go into this. So that's that. I will use other tools, like I like tonal balance. And what it does is it just shows you the EQ curve of your song versus you can do it versus like a preset, but a lot of times I load my reference in there. So without let's go to the drop. And I do a side note too. Like sometimes when you have metric AB or these things, it'll like it'll overload your master. So it looks like I'm redlining on there. That's usually just because the one of these other tools is on there, like when the metering tools is on. Oh, plus I've got both these. That's not just one at a time. So and you can solo it if you want. And this too, again, I'm not necessarily trying to make it fall in that area. It's really just a sanity check. Like, have I done my initial mix in a very balanced way so it matches my reference in a good way? I used to get a little more paranoid trying to make it fit perfectly, and then I realized, wait, I want this song to be unique. So it's just again like a sanity check, make sure nothing's way off. Plus, two, I've got two instances of this, so I've got a second one. So I've got two primary um, references that I'm using. So you'll see that it turns out different in each one of them. Like the where it matches the mix on the tone of bounce comes out different. So that's usually I'll just kind of look at that a few times. I'm not using that too much. So that's just in my metering. And let's jump into this master. So let me turn the stuff off. All right, first step, a little more clipping. So I've clipped on my individual tracks, I've clipped on my buses. Now I'm going to clip again on the first stage of the master. So I'm really just capturing the tops of those peaks, as you can see by the red area on the standard clip. Then I'm just going for a it's kind of this Ableton plugin. It's a pretty good one. I'm really just using it to get some volume, some gain. Not and kind of round out the peaks just a little bit. I really don't like to do too much. I don't crank the threshold. But the makeup gain is getting me some of the characteristic of this plugin and get a little gain out of it. Got some EQs. Really just this one is I've carved out the low end on the sides. So again, the goal is just to make sure that the low end is down the center and monoed. And that's really all I'm doing here. And I've taken some low end off the bottom too, to like, because again, just cutting some of the subs so I don't have too much sub going on. Up here, yeah, just cutting off to like some of the super high frequencies that you're not hearing, just because like not everybody can hear up there. Like I can't hear up there. Like my hearing actually only goes to 12,000. But just getting rid of kind of that sibilance up there that you might hear and a little bit of headroom. This I kind of did. This is I just add a teeny bit of this, and looks really surgical. Uh, I just matched the EQ from one of the references, and I actually found I kind of liked what it added to it. So let's see. I feel like it gave it kind of a little brightness that I liked, but I want to be subtle with that because if you get too hardcore into this, it gets a little phasey. So I only added 10% just for a little character to it.
When you say that you match the EQ from a reference,
Yeah.
are you doing it by ear? You're like, I know.
Oh no, hell no, no. So there's a tool in here where you can copy the EQ curve from a song, and so I don't see it here, but I think I pulled it in from before, and so it's right there. Yeah, you basically just take the Pro Q, put it on the like on like a track with the reference, play it and records it, and it gets you the EQ curve. All right, so then I threw on Imager, and I'll show it because this actually made a pretty big impact because it. You can really hear it in the hi hats and the high ends. Because it's funny, I didn't realize it's almost like it's saturating because I feel like it's giving a little crispiness to the hi hats, which I like. But I did like have to dial it down a bit. This is a multiband. It's in multiband mode, so it's affecting each frequency band differently. So you can see here, it's actually boosting the highs a little bit on the upper mids, just a teeny bit on lower mids, and then it's actually reducing the stereo width on the low ends. And I think I started with a preset, the dynamic width, and then just adjusted it. All right, so this is as Matt mentioned, this is another streaky tool that I'm using. So it's like a combo here where a lot of times a nice effect before you're going into a compressor, when you're trying to get like affect the low end, is just do a little cut and the sub. So I've cut the sub a little bit, and then I'm going into another multiband. But there's something specific with the multiband I'll show you. Well, before I do that, I'll just show you before and after. And the main purpose of this kind of combo, and the reason I have it its own little group here, is I want to get that pumping effect, that like sound of the kick coming out the forefront and everything else swelling with it. So. So in the end, I am doing several things here, and you can hear the volume go up a little bit, but you can also feel that kick really coming out the forefront more. But it's also kind of bringing in the sub with it too. So it's got a nice way of like making them work together, but create a pumping effect. And then a key thing with that, what I found what you do with the multiband is I'm compressing just the sub here, but really look at what's going on with your attack. And let's see, I'll adjust it, but one thing to notice too is the attack, rule of thumb, not always, usually the less attack, the more sub you'll hear. And the more less attack, the longer the attack time, longer it takes for it to kick in, the more kick you're going to feel. So. So again, it's subtle, but I find, you know what? Let me do this. I feel like this helps demonstrate this much better. If I solo this, all right, so you can really hear it. So I'm hearing a lot more kick compared to the sub. Now I'm hearing a lot more sub, and I find that it's a little bit more, a little harder to tell the difference between the sub and the kick. I mean, obviously you can hear it hitting, but as far as how articulated the kick is. Now, for this particular song, I kind of like this combination around like 22, 25%, because it's like a good combo of kick punching through, but there's enough sub in there matching it. But I've just personally found that was a great, like, this really helps achieve what I'm trying to in mixing a track. And then after that whole process, just adding like a standard compressor so that you're bringing the highs back down. And so, because there I'm just compressing low end, here I'm basically bringing it all together. So I've done the low end by itself. Now it's everything to give it a just overall kind of like smooth effect. And this compressor just has kind of been used by people on master, and I like how it sounds. But I'm trying to be very subtle and not take a lot of dB of gain reduction. Because if you do too much, you kind of lose all the character. So it's just to like really glue it all together. All right. Go for a multiband compressor. And this is the template that I use, but again, just a side note, I'm not always using all of these things, and I am like adjusting all of them. I'll throw them on and then I'll adjust them to taste. So with this is a Ableton multiband. I like this thing. It's got its own character. I find it tends to like have its own look, almost like saturation. There's a little bit of brightness on its own. But I'm being very subtle, just doing like 18%. You can hear it's adding a little bit of brightness. It's adding a little bit of gain from the compression. Uh, like in a simple way that I'll use this, you can adjust these thresholds, and I find that they tend to adjust the color. So if like the hi-hats are too bright, you can just increase that threshold, and it'll really like bring down the brightness.
How often are you adjusting the attack time on this as well?
Not too much. I kind of just use the as is, and I'm never using it too much, so I'm not being able to tell the difference in the attack too much. Um, so a lot of times I'm not adjusting it too much. And then this is a tape saturator that I like, and I feel like it's good on a master because it just kind of tends to kind of warm up the low end and really just make it kind of work together. I've kind of dialed it in how I want, but I'll show you AB it too. So to my ear, there's lots of things going on with it, but what I hear most is that it it makes the kick sound a little more full and less like because they're a little cardboardy, so it just kind of brings it together. I'm mostly targeting the low end when I'm adding this. And then this is kind of a preset I came across as somebody was trying to replicate Daft Punk sound. So again, the whole point is just for that pumping effect, and I found that it really does help. I find it makes the kick sound a little more bouncy in the mix instead of like a thud. Um, because that's something I do try and achieve. I notice like I find when my mix is bad, the bass just sounds like an anvil hitting and hitting, and but when it sounds good, it's got a bounce to it. So even though it's like a kick is very strong, it's got still a bounciness to it.
What is that one called?
This is just a stock Ableton plugin, but there's a preset or a kind of a preset I remember coming across on the internet and tried and found I liked. I can give it to you afterwards if you want. All right, so then I clip some more. Do a little bit of this EQ, and again, I haven't done actually any boosting or cutting. I just like the sound of this EQ. I think it gives it a nice character, and that's all I'm using it for. To my ear, it fills in some gaps, gives a little fullness, makes it a little less brittle sounding. Yeah, exactly. And then there's actually an EQ I'm kind of just starting to use a little bit. It's like they have EQs that are specific to mastering, and this is one of them. I don't think it's always totally necessary because in the end, it's just an EQ. I'm kind of playing around with it. I'm not doing a lot because at this point, I want to be doing all my EQ on the tracks themselves. I don't want to be doing a ton of, so these are very subtle moves. And also, I'm doing it kind of after some processing because it's like, or corrective. And so, really, all I'm doing is just this really subtle mid EQ um, uh, cut. Like I did this like around like 1700 K, which is like a very specific range. It's mids 2000 to 5000 are very sensitive to the human ear, so it's easy for that mid range to build up. And I just found that that frequency was like a little harsh on my ear, but I'll maybe it. Next, throwing on just another multiband. And I know I'm doing a lot of processing. I think this is just kind of the method I'm using. There can be other ways. And also, too, some tracks you may not need all this stuff, but I kind of was playing around with these items, and especially because this track, the mid range, again, I keep saying mids, but like I was thinking about it the whole time and trying to really tame it and get it to where I wanted to be. So this is part of sculpting that. All right, next you see I just jumped into limiter, Pro L2, just going for volume, loudness. Now I will kind of play around again with some of the settings to kind of maybe dial in, get a little bit of different of a sound. But I've just kind of this again streaky. It's got this like clarity. Just very. It's supposed to be a very transparent preset that I like to start with. And then finally, kind of like what I did with the vocals, I use Ozone. Now, if you just want a quick and dirty mix, you could probably just use Ozone on its own. Again, I used the mastering assistant. And again, this is kind of supposed to be mastering for you, but the way I use it, and again, I think this is where I think AI things in general, I dialed in everything to how I like and to my taste. And then this is just to see, okay, what else could there be? Let's get some other ideas on the table. And what I like too is that you can have it kind of match your track to the reference. So I loaded the reference in there, and it had it do its best approximation of trying to match it. Obviously, it's not going to be exact, but then I adjusted a lot. Like it added these kind of fancy tools it's got, and I played around with them, tried to adjust the amount, decided they're not adding to the track. I did like the slight EQ changes that made. I like this clarity thing, which I believe is just kind of like a they use these kind of weird names. So I forget the difference between them sometimes, but I know this is can be almost like soothe, where it's just reducing harsh frequencies. And then stabilizer, I think, is like another. Oh no, this is like taming transients in different frequency ranges. I can't go into too much of what exactly this thing does, but I kind of A/B'd it to tell what I like. And then I like the dynamic EQing that it did. And then finally, the last step is they call it a maximizer, but it's a limiter. But you can see I've turned down the gain considerably. It's not doing a whole lot. I do one specific thing I always do when I'm use this ozone maximizer is I A/B the different types of maximizer it's got. I find like they have like significantly different sounds. I feel like 80% of the time I do end up on the pumping one because again, this dance music, I want it to have that pumping sound. But sometimes having the balanced one is better. because you will hear differences in your high end balance. Um, so that's that's the last item on the chain. And then I'm again, let's I think see where I ended up for loudness. And then I'll just show kind of A/B it with the reference that I had. Do you see what I was using and how close I got? And then I'm going to show you all A/B it with all the different references. And you'll kind of see what I did is wasn't getting to match perfectly sonically with any one of them, but almost like an average of the ones because each one of the references have their own sonic qualities and balance. Yeah, yeah, sure.
Since you're talking about this, this one person wrote, what aspects should be primarily considered when selecting a reference track? What do you look for?
That's a great question, and I did have it on my agenda to go into that. If I'm working on somebody else's track, I'll ask them for references. Um, but having said that, I usually still always add my own, especially if it's a genre that I'm pretty familiar with. And key things I like to do is, if possible, have it be in the same key of the song that you're mixing. And the reason why that's important is because when you're getting into really listening to specific bands, like the low end in particular, there's gonna be a difference between different keys, especially because the kick is gonna be tuned. Um, and I'm actually realizing I forgot to go over that. A lot of times you want to tune your kick to be in the key of the song, and so your low end, it's all gonna be tuned to this one note. Um, so if you're listening to a song in a different note, it's gonna throw off your like your matching to the other song. So I feel like if you can cut out that variable, it really makes it so you don't have to like calibrate in your head. Oh, is the difference between I'm hearing between my song and my reference a difference in the key or in the sonic quality I want to get? If it's the same key, you don't have to worry about that. Now, having said that, every song is going to kind of dominate in different frequency ranges, and you'll kind of hear the difference in the reference I have. So I'm gonna like kind of try and identify my song. Is it a this song very mid-rangey, kind of like low, like kind of very down the center to like me like 2,000 to 5,000 range. So I want something that kind of fills that space. So I'm looking for references that match that sonic quality. Then obvious ones too, loudness. You don't want something that's too much louder um, or too less loud than what you're targeting. So I think those are key things to go for. Yeah, yeah, sure. Just my ear. Like I kind of like I'm not so perfect in my ear. I can hear, oh, it's 1.7. I just do it, but I can say mid range is kind of not sounding great. So I'll just kind of cut and then kind of move the frequency till it's like getting rid of the frequencies that I heard that were kind of harsh for me.
What key were you? I missed that one.
Uh, I'm kind of playing around with using this mastering EQ, which again, I don't think you necessarily have to use a mastering EQ on the master, but I had it and I was like, hey, let me try this out. So that's what I was using. I know a lot of people are, if you go on YouTube, everybody and their mother will talk about the way to find harsh frequency is you boost the heck out of it, bandpass, and a very tight bandpass, and then just sweep it until you find the one you like. I don't get it. That's never worked for me. Like it just everything sounds bad. I found what works for me personally is I'll just do a sharp cut and sweep that. And when it gets rid of the frequency I don't like, bam, I've got it. And then I'll adjust how much I'm cutting. That makes sense. I know usually I can visualize that, but I think that you guys know what I mean. Any other questions on line? Cool. Those are some good questions. I know we're a little over time. We're originally supposed to start questioning period now, but we've been mixing questions in, so I'm just going to keep going over unless we're going. Okay. All right. So again, I'm just going to play the song against the tracks that have been A, B, the references, so you can hear the differences. And again, my strategy is to kind of do an average target, like matching of all of them. So. So you can tell like each audio to the streaming. So I just want to make sure. Let's see. Okay, so make sure this goes in the right place. Yep. All right. Yeah, we still got audio there. So you probably noticed the songs all are a little bit different. Like in the first one, it doesn't have as much kick as present in the mix as is this song, but the next one did. One of them is like the second one there, this like Be Free but Mauer remix. It's like not a lot of low mids at all, but it's very bright on the hi hats. So I was kind of matching my hi hats to that. And then the last one on that list was probably the most different song from the one I have, but it was only one that was like very kind of like dominant in the mid range area that I was trying to match. So I still wanted something that was different than the other two references. So like I could just make sure that I'm not going crazy and I don't get too obsessive about trying to make my track match those references too much. It's like, okay, this is permissible. This is in the realm of I'm not crazy, so I'm cool and I don't have to, do anything too hardcore to get it to those other ones. Um, Also, just like a side note on this feature too, like with this plugin, I really like. I use it to check the loudness, hear the LUFS. I'm looking at the integrated LUFS, so you see I'm pretty close to even this last one. Mine is about 7.1. There's 7.6. I mean 6.7. I also really like this plugin because it's on the master. I will constantly be using this filter feature. So if I just want to target and like focus on listening to one part of the frequency range, it's really helpful. So like just listening to bass, and it's nice, it's got sub and bass. Want just to listen to sub, it's nice because it does it to the other track too. Because sometimes if there's all this like mid range going on, I can't really focus on what's going on the low end. So it's nice to listen to the difference between the two and like flip between. And like with other ranges. Yeah. Metric AB. You can get it on Plugin Alliance. Yeah, it's great. It does a ton of other things too. It's like a kind of Swiss Army knife. I just really like it. And like, yeah, you can set like which section of the reference you're playing from, and you can do different sections of it. A nice feature too is like it's got this gain match. So if you haven't mastered the track and your track is obviously quieter than the reference, it'll match the gain to your track. So you're a being on an equal playing ground with it. I will also do sanity check. I do like boxing go span as another way, just another leveling. All right. Yeah, it's great. Thanks for coming.
Really, really, really.
Yeah, definitely. That was helpful.
Nice meeting everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just last thing is going to span. Let's kill this. And I've got somewhat fancy way to see both one of my references. You kind of have to do some fancy routing stuff to make it happen, but it's just another way I check my reference against my track. So here, I think I can just. I think there's a way to freeze it so you can see it, but I don't know what it is right now. But it's showing both the frequencies spectrums at the same time. So I'll use that to just make sure I'm in the ballpark of the other one. Sometimes I might have my kick way too loud. Sometimes like the sub too low. So it's really good for checking that.
How'd you route that in?
Dude, it's kind of complicated. I actually have the reference track on its own track. It's in a group, but I've muted the group so you don't actually hear it when it's being played. And then I have an instance of Voxengo span on the group. You go to this one, and another thing that's kind of crazy is I have to use the VST and not the VST3 because the VST3 doesn't have the sidechain.
So you're sidechaining from a separate track, not
Yeah.
from the metric AB.
Right. So yeah, because I'm in span. Yeah, I'm sidechaining from the other track.
I thought you were getting the audio like out of metric AB somehow, and I was like, how are you doing
No. Yeah, that would have been trippy. So yeah, this is something I do. It's once you get into the routing stuff, it's a little complicated. I mean, if you want to know, just ping me. I can send you a preset or something. But I'm just because like I'm a nerd and I'm willing to put in the time to figure out, because I want to see because some people just have two instances of span seam side by side, but to me, I'm like I want to see it like right there. So this works for me.
Have you seen this is the free one, right? Have you
Yeah.
seen the pro version of Span where you can get like multi-ins and like it's like there'll be like 7 different colors of stuff?
You know, I've seen that and I've thought about them. Like, I don't have a use for that personally. But yeah, I have looked and I'm like, God, do I want that? Like, but yeah. So I mean, that's a lot. I know you're probably exhausted. Any other questions? Yeah.
On your master, when the master train's all done, are you trying to hit a certain RMS?
I'm really just thinking of LUFs.
Just less.
Yeah. Because that's the measure for because that's kind of at this point more of a standard for loudness. Um, and again, it's the tool I use, so I have a good sense of what's where, and then it's easy to use in metric AB. So no, I'm not targeting that. RMS. Was there anything else on the?
Let me just.
Well, while you're looking those up, what's your?
Sure. Okay, so it was 12.
Yeah,
Do you like it?
love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw that is the one feature I thought. Well, I mean, I like the key, the global key at the top.
Yeah.
But that just having the faders
Ah.
to be able to pull up.
I use it
Nice.
all the time. Also, I like that you can get rid of everything down below and have the full screen free. Even that.
What's the command for that?
There's option command 3 is the clip. Option command 4 is the plugins. And then there's a keyboard command for the faders. It's like command option M.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. Also, too, I kind of nerded out on this, the whole filtering. I created my own, like they have their own plugins, but I created my own section. And so like, because, we all accumulate a lot of plugins, get bundles. There's plugins we don't.
You more than most, I think.
Maybe. Yeah, I've been doing it well. So, but the thing is then I forget what my favorites are. So I need something to tell me what are my favorites. Yeah. And honestly, it's Cameron can test. I had this other tool. It's called Live Enhancement Suite. Yeah, shout out. Where you could right click here and have a tree that you create custom where all your plugins. it was the most convenient thing. Honestly, it's even better than this, but it was a third party thing, and we actually reached out to the developer, and he said he's not gonna upgrade it to 12, even though we begged him and offered to pay him. He's like, no. Um, it was awesome, and I'm still mourning the loss of that. But this is a good second.
Nice.
Yeah,
So my other question,
yeah,
I have, well, I'm an artist like first and foremost. That's
yeah.
what I want to do. Do you think what degree of mixing and mastering do you think you should get into as an artist? Like, I don't want to spend all my time like learning the
Yeah.
intricacies of it rather than like writing new songs. But where do you think is like a good way to where we hand it over to you? It's in like a really good spot for you
Yeah.
to, you know.
I mean, I would say minimum learn that, get it to a good spot. Um, if you are going to use another mixer, like, so if you're giving it to me, uh, definitely learn. Honestly, I think avoid some, avoid the bad habits is number one. And some of the bad habits are kind of what I was mentioning at the first stage of the mixing, gain staging, seamless production. It's really, you're going to set yourself up much more for success, even if you have an external mixer, if you start with good gain staging. If you're not overloading your individual tracks, fooling yourself and over compressing things, uh, that's why you want to start like what Matt was saying is like go into your plugin. Like if you use Serum or other synths, go in, turn the master gain on that down. So when like without any plugins before it, you already have some headroom on your channel. So let's just say 10 dB of headroom on your channel. Uh, that way, once you start adding effects into it to do your sound design, you're not risking just overloading things. And like, because you send that to a mastering, or somebody mix it, it just makes their job so much harder. Um, learning things like another bad habit I've seen when people give me is like, I'll say you give me vocals to mix. Vocals usually you'll do a main vocal, then you have doubles. Uh, doubles don't just give me a copy of the same one, because you can't have even like a copy of vocal or anything really. I've seen people try to do like trying to get like a gain or whatever. Give me multiple copies of the same track. It is so hard to deal with. It causes phase issues, and you can like tweak it to try not to, but it's really hard. So I say step one, if you are going to use an external mixer and you don't want to get totally into mixing, just learn what the bad habits are and just don't do those, and you'll get yourself like 80% of the way there.
Do you think it's reasonable for someone to be able to learn all this stuff and be able to write their own tracks and mix and master them as well and like release the whole thing like
So
time wise?
yeah, I think a lot of people do, but to be honest, like I think once you start becoming like a touring DJ producer, I think a lot of people do end up reaching out to and using like mix engineers, definitely mastering engineers, more often, just to save time. You just don't have the time. That being said, a lot of people do it all, but there's no shame in outsourcing this stuff, because the more you get into the music business, the more you realize you're both supposed to do everything, but not everything, right? You do have to be like you want to be an artist, you have to have the look, you have to like post on Instagram, you have to like reach out to people, you have to network in addition to like making great music. But once you start building up, you're gonna need a manager. You need like once you are to like a big level, you're gonna have somebody do your social media for you, help out with it. Um, Helping out with like can be with mixing or mastering. So
It's good to like know what you want out of
yeah,
that
it's
basically.
also too like I actually really enjoy mixing. So I've nerded out and gotten into it. Some people maybe you don't like it, maybe, or you just kind of like, yeah, I kind of like it, but I don't want to freaking nerd out. There's no shame in outsourcing that to other people, because if you just want to create and it's getting in the way of you creating the something and like bringing the music that you want to make out to the world, then outsource it. I mean, in the end, like the money you're going to be spending and the time you're going to be spending, it's going to be worth just having somebody else do it. I've had tracks that were like I've just got too personally attached to the track, where it's like, you know what, I'm gonna have somebody else mix this because I've lost all my objectivity on this, and I'm on a deadline, so I need to like bring somebody else in to do it. And I'm glad I did because they just saw things I didn't, and sometimes like they're at like, a different ear, but it's finding somebody you trust, you like their style, they communicate in a way with you that you like. Um, I think it's key things. Any other questions? Any other online questions? All right, cool.
Actually, I do have one.
Yeah,
When you were probably, it's kind of go to where Jonathan was talking about, like as an artist, right?
yeah,
Because you are an artist that I know who performs a lot,
yeah,
not just here, in Europe a lot. And I talk to you and you would say, oh, I did this one in Amsterdam. I mixed this one on the plane, or
yeah,
whatnot. In your studio, I know that you know your tools, you know your speakers, you know your room. How do you make sure things translate?
yeah.
Do you have any tips and tricks for like traveling DJs, artists, musicians, to make sure you have a template that works everywhere?
Yeah, yeah. So I think Tapu's point, like he knows me, and I've got a studio here. Got a studio that like I built the sound panels. It's dialed in. Had sound engineer help like make it sound good. So it's like a room that I can trust, and I've learned. Whereas like if I'm traveling on the road, like I've just got headphones and a laptop. So to me, like I probably what I'm doing is getting my if I'm mixing on the road. I've also got headphones that I've just gotten used to, and so I know somewhat how they will translate between what I'm hearing on my headphones and my room. That plus metering, a little bit of metering. Just it's kind of a sanity check. Make sure I'm within the realm of things. I think also too the references help with that too because again they're kind of guardrails to make sure that I'm not getting overzealous with my kick, which I usually do, so I have to dial it down. um, uh, But honestly, like for a final mix, I do like to just go back to my room. So I'll probably get the mix like 95% of the way there on my laptop and headphones, and then just do the final polishing here.
Do you? I've heard that people like tailor the mixing and mastering to what venue they think they're gonna play it at. So like if you're in like a warehouse or whatever, you're not
Hmm.
gonna put like a ton of reverb on it because it's gonna have a bunch of reverb. Whereas like if you're outside, not as
I
much.
actually never heard that.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
Interesting.
Yeah, so like interesting though. So I guess you be like on the vocals, you don't want too much reverb on the vocals.
Yeah, and just like the
Huh.
drums and stuff like that as
That's
well. Because
interesting.
if you're outside, there's no reverb, so you might have to put some.
Uh, yes and no. I mean, it's a different kind of reverb, I'd say. Um, but I see what you're saying. It's going to have a different effect. Like in a warehouse, it's going to be slapping around. I can see that. Honestly, I haven't heard of that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I
I
just
just
haven't.
heard someone mention it one time. I was like,
Yeah,
oh, that's like an interesting idea. I don't know if that's.
sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot to like mix in the beginning, and I don't know how exactly. I mean, I feel like you'd have to like. It's kind of a cool idea. I mean, thinking it through, I would imagine you might want to have a reference room. Like there's maybe like a place you play a lot in, and you try out a mix there and like dial in like, oh, that average warehouse sound it requires like cutting my reverb by 20%. I could see that. Um, but it's tough too because like what if the venue's half full? That's going to affect how much reverb there is, right? Like because that's different sound absorption. So you're going to have a lot of there's a lot of variables there. Like the warehouse is going to be different sizes. Again, not trying to shoot it down. I'm just thinking through all the variables there. Like the thing is too, like as a DJ, you're probably playing like 20 to 50 tracks in a set.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt like
Oh,
most of those DJs producers have dialed in, and I've never seen on Beatport the warehouse low reverb mix. Right? Yeah, yeah, like yeah, this is warehouse. Like yeah, 3,000 capacity in there. That'd be kind of cool. I mean, maybe there's a whole site on the dark web I don't know about where it's got those different mixes, but it's kind of a novel idea. I mean, maybe if you've got the one place you play, that'd be kind of cool. But yeah,
The next tool some sort of back end DSP.
Dude, yeah, I mean, dude,
over
maybe it's like the AI where it's like,
Yeah.
but I kind of, I would see it more in like your mix, like your DJ mixer. It's like, has a like a mic that monitors the room. And it's like, okay, how much reverb is here? Like, and I'm gonna limit how much like slap delay I hear on my tracks here. That'd be kind of cool. Yeah, cool. Anything else? Yeah,
So for your kick, you talked about tuning.
yeah.
A couple questions to see what you do on it.
Hmm.
Do you give a certain length of kick in mind? You're like, okay, I want it to be like 150 milliseconds, 200 max, 250 or whatever it is, so that it doesn't kind of get this low subby, like like in a big venue where it's just like you just hear this because your kick's too long.
Yeah, yeah.
To the next quarter note, or do you have like a preset thing in mind, or you?
So kick length, to me is mostly dependent on what's going on with the bass and sub. So rule of thumb, the more legato or held the bass is, the punchier you want your kick. So, I can have like an eighth note or less. Like thinking at 120, like an eighth note that's around 200 milliseconds, maybe 240. So probably that or less. Um, and also too in like when I get in like production and sound design, like it's probably have a kick with less tone to it. If like with this song, he's got one layer of bass that is drawn out, but the sub itself is a little more staccato. So you've got some room to be a little bit more uh, varied. Uh, but to answer your question a little more in depth, let's say like yeah, again it's the interplay with the bass. It's really the sub and bass that's the most biggest thing for me. So I can have a longer kick if make like if there's not a lot of sub going on. Maybe it's like some tech house songs like will have bass like this. The bass is driving the whole time, but you have some tech house songs where the bass is a little bit more bouncy. It's just like doom ba-doom uh, forget my singing, but like rhythm wise, it's not always hitting. So you do have the potential for a little bit boomier of a kick if you want it. Yeah, or some songs I've seen like you've got just. I mean, best example is like techno with a rumble kick where it's like there's almost no bass, it's just the kick, and it has the bass in it, right? So, does that answer your question? Okay, cool. And also too, I find it's part of the initial sound design too. So I'll the more and more I produce, the more I find all this stuff starts in the sound design at the very beginning. Producing is all, it's like 90% sample selection. That the better your selection, and it's not just like is this a great sounding kick? Is this kick fit with this bass, fit with this arp? Do they all fit together well in like a very musical way, uh, where the frequencies of them are not competing so much by default? The more you can do that from the beginning, the much more success you're going to have down the line of the shaping your sound design to mixing and mastering.
So on that, sort of note of things,
Yeah.
do you think at some point have the way in your mix, maybe you've already covered this,
Yeah.
having a master, like at least a semi-decent master on is a good way, and then you can take it off before you send it away to a mixer or a mastering engineer?
I kind of go, I used to put a limiter on my master when I was producing, and but to be honest, now I I think if you need that, because what's the limiter do? It gives you loudness, but also squashing things a little bit, and it's getting you closer to what the mixed and mastered result would sound like. And sometimes you need that because like music is very much writing. I find is about feeling and energy, and you get excited about something. And sometimes if you don't have it on there, it's not that exciting, and the limiter gives you that excitement. So I think in that case, if you feel like you need that, use it. For me, I kind of have a personal challenge lately where I want to get the excitement from my sound selection and my samples, and so I try at least initially not to use a limiter and and do it without that. And so far I'm liking the results. But I'm not. I don't think there's a one way to do it. I think it's just judge. Do I want more excitement here? Do I want to like to feel what I'm feeling? Throw on limiter. I probably wouldn't get too crazy and be like EQ or like multi-band on it. Just do a simple limiter that's going to give you some gain. I think that so that you're not getting because the problem is if you do too much processing on your master before the final mixing mastering stage, you are producing to that and to that color, and if you take it off, you lose that. Not the worst thing in the world. You can just leave it on there, but it does kind of handcuff you to that. And if you haven't been careful about your gain staging, it can get you in problems if you're not really careful with it. Yeah, so I think we've covered a lot. I hope feel free to ping me with any questions. Like I'm on Instagram. Feel free to ping me there. I answer all my DMs. I'm also here. I know a lot of you guys are at Garnish, so if you're walking through, you see me, say hi, introduce yourself.
What's your Instagram?
MRKO.music. If you just do MRKO and your friends, you'll probably pop up. Little purple icon there. Yeah, but like I'm based here in LA. I play shows. Like you said, I played at Academy recently, opening for Benny Benassi. Super fun. So help get you in if you need to.
Absolutely. MRKO,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Big round.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Dude, it was so informative. Thank you so much for doing this for us. And also, ask MRKO for any questions. And talking to the folks in chat as well. Feel free to follow him. And if you're local to LA, let's go support MRKO. It's always a great show. Every show I've been to, been blown away.
And if you have a mix that you want me to just give you my opinion on, feel free to send it over.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Nice.
Very cool. Thank you, chat.
Yeah. Thank you, chat. Thanks for joining.